Morning again, Victor. I feel like I was just up here. That's interesting. We're excited today for our last sermon in the Roadmap series. How many of you have enjoyed this series? It's been awesome. I've really liked it. I've gotten a lot from it. I've gone back and watched some of the other messages as well. It's just been fantastic, and we're excited to move into some series in the future. But today we're going to be looking at our final destination on that roadmap, and today I'm going to be talking about there is more. Everyone say it with me this morning. There is more. We believe that as Christians that God has more for us than anything that we could ever come up with on our own. And to illustrate that this morning, I want to tell you a little bit of a story about my son, Roman. He's my oldest son. He's 6 years old. And Roman, for those of you guys that have encountered him, can know, like, he has feelings, okay? He has some deep, deep feelings. And sometimes he can be a little melodramatic. How many of you ever had a child that was a little melodramatic? Okay, you had a kid, it was just like, all right, let's ratchet it down a little bit. You're at an 11, I need you down at like a 6. So that's Roman sometimes. And Roman, and it's good because sometimes Roman has really, really positive feelings, and sometimes Roman is just full of love and joy, and he spreads it around. And man, there's few kids that can, that can let you know how special you are as my son Roman. But it's funny because when he has a bad day, man, he really has a bad day. Do you remember when you were kids and like just the smallest things seemed like it was the apocalypse? Anybody? So that was Roman, and Roman has a bunch of stories like this. But just the other day, we had a little girl over to our house, and we were watching her for her parents because her parents had something going on. Her mom had to go to a funeral and some things, and so we were watching this little girl. And Roman's always thought that this little girl was a little fly. You know what I mean? You know those little baby romances. You know. So there's a little baby romance going on there, and Roman's kind of always had in the back of his mind, like, I'm gonna marry her, you know? And so she came over to our house the other day, and how many of you can remember, like, you know, when you were younger and you got to spend time with that special someone, and how you would build up in your mind what it was going to be like? And, you know, some of you ladies, like, you have expectations still about Valentine's Day, even though your husband disappoints you every year. Like we look forward to these days, and we build them up in our mind, and so Roman was so excited that this little girl was coming over, and he was excited, and he was talking about it, he was amped up, and then she showed up, and man, he was on his best behavior, and Roman, bless his heart, man, but sometimes when he's interacting with somebody who wants to impress them, he goes a little extra, you know? It's like they say something, he's like, meh, you know, like just trying to make sure that she knows how, you know, and then he'll like make like burping noises or things, trying to impress her with his manliness, you know, and he'll bring out his Lego set and be like, ha, you know, and he's pulling out all the stops. He's just trying to impress her, and then they go outside, and after a little while, this little girl comes in, and Ashley's like, where's Roman? And she's like, he's outside, and Ashley goes outside, and he's hiding behind our car, and he's curled up in a ball with his face buried in his knees, and he's sobbing. And Ashley's like, baby, what's wrong? What's going on? What happened? And he looks at her and goes, she has a boyfriend. She has a boyfriend. My life is over. And his little 6-year-old heart is broken. And Ashley's like, Roman, it's okay. It's okay. You're 6 years old. It's fine. Like, there's other girls. He goes, no, she has a girlfriend. And then the other girl that I like has a boyfriend too. And the other girl that he likes is a 30-year-old woman, you know? And he's like, both of them have boyfriends. Both of them. He's like, I can't take this anymore. And he's just covered in tears. And his little heart's just snapped in two, because in his little 6-year-old mind, he thinks, this is it. This is the end. There's no hope for me. You know, my life is never going to get better. Anybody ever reach that point in your life? You ever reach that point where maybe you're not 6 years old and stuff, and we laugh now, right? We laugh now because we're looking at this little 6-year-old, we're like, oh boy, don't, there is more. There's more to life than this little 6-year-old romance that you have for another child or a 30-year-old woman. Like, those aren't going anywhere, you know? There's more to life. Have you ever found yourself in that place where you just thought this was it? I want to encourage you this morning and tell you that there is more. I don't know what you're lacking. I don't know what you're missing. I don't know what you feel like has passed you by, but no matter what it is, there is more. And many of us, we get into these seasons of life where we feel like things are never going to get better. This is it. This is awful. I'm at rock bottom, and I want to let you know there is more today. There was a time in my life where I was in a relationship. Any of you ever been in a failed relationship before? I was in a relationship for 8 years. I thought I was going to marry this girl, and it didn't work out. And I remember when it came to the end, I thought I'd never be able to find love again. I thought I'll never be happy. I'll never be able to find love again. I'll never be able to find somebody that could mean as much to me as this girl did. But y'all saw me up here with my wife this morning. I'm an incredibly blessed and happy man. Let me tell you this morning, there is more. There is more. When I was a teenager, I struggled very heavily with depression. It was thick. Any of you in here, you don't need to raise your hand this morning, but you know what that's like. You know what it's like. And I remember that one day it got so severe that I was curled up in a ball on my floor. And I was convinced that nobody loved me. And I was convinced that maybe the world would be a better place if I wasn't in it anymore. Have you ever had those thoughts? You ever had those feelings? I was convinced that I could never get past this point where I was curled up in a ball on the floor. And I'm standing in front of you today filled with abundant joy and blessings in my life and telling you, church, there is more. There is more. Turn to your neighbor this morning and say, there is more. Turn to your neighbor on the other side this morning and say, there's a whole lot more. Turn to the person behind you and say, there's a whole lot more upon more upon more. Grab the shoulders of the person in front of you and shake them just a little bit and say, there's so much more. See, sometimes, you guys, we reach a place where we're certain that there's more. Because we live in a culture that teaches us value in achievement, don't we? We live in a culture that teaches us value and achievement. Every time you turn on the radio, it's talking about the lifestyle that you need to live, how much money you need to make, what cars you need to drive, what type of people you need to be in relationships with. And how many of you know Hollywood is filled with people that have achieved those things and are still miserable? How many of you know that there's lots of people walking around with winning lottery tickets in their pockets that are standing on the edge of a bridge looking over, wondering if there's more? Are you with me? From a young age, you're taught that you have to go to college, you have to get a career, you have to have a family, you have to buy a house, and then you acquire all those things, and you're standing there middle-aged, looking around, asking, is there more? I want to tell you that more is only found in God. More is only found in God, and we get restless in life because we get dissatisfied because deep down we know something. There has got to be more. There's got to be more than this career. There's got to be more than this relationship. There's got to be more than the money in my bank account. There's got to be more than this car that I'm driving. There's got to be more than this clothes that I'm wearing. There's got to be more than this thing that I'm chasing. There's got to be more than this. And we know it. And every time you get that thing, and you know what that thing is for you, every time you get that thing that you're just saying, if I can get it, I'll be happy, you know you're not happy. You know you're not happy. I just did some marriage counseling with a couple recently, and we were sitting down, and the wife was talking about how this husband had a compulsion, and he kept on trying to acquire these things, and he was spending all their family's money on it, and then when he acquired it, he would be like, this is it, babe, this is it, this is the last one, I'm happy now. How many of you believe that that was true? There was always more, wasn't there? There's always more. And you're never going to find more until you start looking at the right place, because I believe that God created us with a knowledge that there is more, with a conviction that there is more. And I believe that more is only found in God and His plan for our lives. Job chapter 11, verses 7 through 9 in the Message translation says this: do you think you can explain the mystery of God? Do you think you can diagram God Almighty? God is far higher than you can imagine. He's far deeper than you can comprehend. And He's stretching farther than Earth's horizon, far wider than the endless ocean. God is bigger than anything you've been able to come up with until this point. And right now, your desires and your hopes for more are tapped into the finite, and God is calling you to tap into the infinite. And God is saying, I have something bigger for you. It's deeper than the deepest ocean. It stretches farther than the horizon. It is higher than anything you've ever thought of up until this point. Do you want what I have for you or what you think you need? God is calling you to more. And we begin to dream, and sometimes our dreams don't match reality. Has any of you ever found yourself in that predicament where the dreams you have for your life don't match your current situation? This isn't the way that I planned it. This isn't the way I hoped things would be. It's really discouraging when we're in those times in our lives, when we're looking at the situation that lays in front of us, the predicament or the obstacle or the trial that we now find ourselves in, and we feel like this isn't what I had hoped for all those years. I want to let you know that even in the midst of those situations, God is still in control. That God is still watching out for you, that God is still fighting your battles for you. God's still in control. And there's a character in the Bible named Joseph. And Joseph was a young man and he was a dreamer. Any dreamers in here? Some of you guys are like, I'm dreaming for the popcorn as soon as you're done preaching. I'm dreaming you're going to preach a short message. Joseph was a dreamer. And the Bible talks about how he would have all these dreams, and he had these crazy dreams. Like, he had dreams that his brothers were bowing down to him. Like, how many of you guys wish that dream came true when you were a kid? Anybody? Oh, man, I'd kill if that dream came true in my life. My brother Derek comes in and bows down to me. I'll be like, kiss my feet. Peasant. Shine my shoes, Derek. And Joseph had dreams that his brothers would come and they would bow down to him, and he had all these grand dreams. And then after all these grand dreams, he tells his brothers, oh, I had dreams that you guys were bowing down to me, and you guys came before me, and I was ruling over you. And they're like, oh, really? And they threw him in the bottom of a pit. How many of you know the pit doesn't look anything like the dream? You ever been in that place in your life? The pit doesn't look anything like the dream. And then you begin to question the validity of that dream that God gave you because you find yourself presently in a pit. And then somebody comes and they retrieve Joseph out of the pit, and I'm sure he's thinking, this is it, this is my salvation, this is where things turn around. But they retrieve him from the pit to sell him into slavery. It just got worse. It just got worse. And he travels to a faraway land, and he travels there as a slave, and he's sold to a rich man. And because he's a hard worker and he's faithful and he's dedicated, he begins to work his way up to a place of prominence in that house. And he finally achieves this position where maybe, just maybe, that dream is starting to become something that he can grab onto again. It's been so long since he's been able to look at it as anything that could ever happen to him. But now he's getting to that place where the dream is within his grasp one more time. And right then, right when he gets to the top, right when he climbs out of the pit and climbs out of the shackles, somebody wrongfully accuses him, and he gets sent to prison. And he's rotting away in a jail cell. And he's still dreaming. Don't let the pits kill your dreams. Don't let the chains break your spirit. Don't let the bars keep you bound. He keeps dreaming, and he keeps dreaming, and he keeps dreaming. And before too long, the Pharaoh of Egypt reaches into the jail cell. And because of Joseph's dreams and Joseph's ability to translate dreams, pulls him out and elevates him to the second highest place in the nation. And Joseph's brothers come before him and bow down just like his dream said that they would. Don't give up on the dreams. Don't give up on the hope that God has put within you. Because with God, even though your circumstance might not suggest it, there is more. With God, even in the pit, he is in control. With God, even when you're sold into slavery and you're bound in chains, God's still got a plan. With God, even though you're thrown in jail for something that you didn't do and you're wrongfully persecuted, he's still in control. He's still leading the way. He's still got a purpose for your life. With God, there is more. God's roadmap for your life will will take you places that you could never find on your own. You don't have the navigational skills to end up at the place that God has purposed for you. There is no road that you could take on your own. There's no GPS that you could subscribe to that gets you to that little red pin in the map that God has set before the foundations of the earth were laid for you. My question for you this morning, are you willing to follow God's roadmap for your life? Because if you're willing to follow it, I promise you there is more. Ephesians chapter 3 verse 20 says this, God can do anything, you know? God can do anything, you know? I like how it says, you know. Because you know. But yet sometimes you don't know, but you know. God can do anything, you know. You know. We know God can do anything. Sometimes we don't act like it. We know it, but we don't behave as if we know it. It says God can do anything, you know, far more. Everybody say more. God can do far more. Look at your neighbor and say more. Look at your other neighbor this morning, and I want you to drag that O out like it owes you money. More. God can do more than you could ever imagine. God can do más. God can do more than you could ever imagine. Are you with me? I got a pretty vivid imagination. God's is better. God created the universe. God created the porcupine and the anteater. God created the Tasmanian devil. His imagination is bigger than mine. God can do more than you could ever imagine or guess or request in your wildest dreams. Sister, that means that those things that you've been hoping for late at night, the things that you've been crying out to God for, the things you've been writing down in your journal, the things that you imagine, this is as good as it's going to get, man, God's plans for you are greater than those. God's design for you is more wonderful than the thing that you've been waiting for your entire life, the thing that you've been working towards. God's plans for you are more beautiful, more wonderful, more satisfying, more fulfilling than anything that you could ever imagine in your wildest dreams. God has more for you. God's bigger than you thought he was. God's bigger than you thought he was. Sometimes we have such a narrow view of God. Are you with me? Sometimes we have such a narrow view of God. We think that God is limited by our sin. We think that God is limited by our past. We think that God is limited by our mistakes. We think that God is limited by our talents or by our abilities. God's bigger than you thought he was. Your doubts and your fears don't intimidate him. They don't scare him. Your past isn't going to chase him off. Are you with me this morning? Your mistakes aren't going to cause his grace to not be enough anymore. God is bigger than you thought he was. Say it with me. God's bigger. God is bigger than you thought he was. God's bigger than your problems. God's bigger than your sin. God's bigger than your past. And this church this morning is filled with testimonies of people who have encountered a God that was bigger than they thought that he was. How many in this room this morning are willing to lift a shout and say, God showed up for me and he's bigger than I thought that he was? Give God a shout today. God's bigger than I thought he was. There was a financial situation that was in front of me that I thought that we wouldn't be able to get through, but God was bigger than my financial situation. There was a health scare that we had, and I thought that it was just an inch between life and death, but God showed up and God tipped the scales in a different direction than the doctor said that they were going to hang in. My God is bigger than I thought he was. There was a child of mine who was on the wrong path, and I was doing everything I could to reach out to them and to change them, and there was nothing I could do until I gave it to a God who was bigger than me, and that God showed up, and my child is serving God, and my child's decisions are well. And I want to encourage you this morning that God is bigger than you thought that he was. God's bigger than you thought that he was, church. And with him, there is more. There is more. Psalm chapter 36, verses 5 through 6 says this: God's love is meteoric. I love the language in this passage. Listen, it's so poetic. God's love is meteoric. His loyalty is astronomic. His purpose is titanic. His verdicts oceanic. Yet in his largeness, nothing gets lost. Not a man, not a mouse slips through the cracks. There's nothing that escapes God. There is nothing that escapes God. God is huge. God is bigger than anything that you can conceive of. And in the middle of all that, he sees you. And you're not falling through the cracks. You're not falling through the cracks. He's not losing sight of you. He's not losing sight of his plans or his promises for you. And I want to encourage you this morning, if you think that you've reached the end of his faithfulness, church, there is more. If you think that you've ran too far from home, I want to let you know, son or daughter, there is more. If you think that you don't deserve his love any longer, I want to encourage you, there is more. If you think that the miracle that you need is too much for God, there is more. If you think that you're beyond salvation because the blood of Christ wasn't sufficient enough for whatever it is that you've done, I want to encourage you this morning, there is more. There is more. There is more than you could ever imagine in your life. And I want to let you know that when life is hard, God's got more. Even when life is good, God's got more. Sometimes, man, God just keeps on blessing and blessing and blessing. And when we read in the Bible that it says that God will open up the floodgates of heaven, sometimes we're like, when it rains, it pours, but in a good way. Because when it rains, it pours the blessings of God. And God continues to give me a life that I don't deserve, and a family that is so much better than anything I ever thought that I could have, and children that love me more than I deserve. And the blessings keep coming and coming and coming and coming, because with God, there is more. It's like when you're growing up and you go to grandma's house for Thanksgiving, and grandma brings you out dinner and you eat all the turkey and you get full, but she just keeps on bringing food, and there's beans and greens and potatoes and tomatoes and hogs and dogs and rabbits and chicken and flaxseed and chicken feed and all this stuff, because with grandma there is more. And she doesn't care if you're filled. She's going to keep on filling you. My grandma, I think, used to be somebody that tortured people, because when I sit at her table, she's putting so much food in me that I swear something's going to break somewhere in my abdomen, and it's going to fall out my belly button, because she is going to fill me up. And I say, Grandma, I'm full. And she say, eat more, young man. I got more food. And I look at how much food my grandma made. I'm like, is this a homeless shelter, or is this Thanksgiving dinner? How many people are you expecting? And she's like, I don't care if nobody shows up. You're eating this food because I made it for you. That's the blessings of God, church, where God just keeps pouring it out on you again and again and again and again. And you're like, God, I'm so full. God, you bless me so much. And God's like, take a little bit more. Just keep on going. I'm going to continue to expand your territory. I'm going to continue to bless your life. I'm going to continue to guide your children. I'm going to continue to show you favor. There is more, church. Psalm chapter 40, verse 5 says this, "O Lord my God, you have performed many wonders for us. Your plans for us are too numerous to list." Is there anybody in here whose God's plans for them are too numerous to list? God showed up more times than you could ever hope to count. It says, God, you have no equal. God, you have no equal. If I tried to recite all your wonderful deeds, I would never come to the end of them. Sometimes we get discouraged because we're focusing on the things that we lack instead of the things that he has already given us. I want to encourage you, the next time that you feel like life is too hard or things are just unfair, to stop for a second and write a list of every time that God's shown up for you. And you'll realize before you reach the end of that list that every single time God showed up, there was more. That every single time you felt like there wasn't enough, God always had more. That every single time that you thought that you'd never be blessed again, that God came through and there was more. Church, listen to me. There is nothing that you can do to earn the favor of God, and there is nothing you can do to silence it. God has more for you today. God has more for you today. God has salvation. God has a holy life. God has a purpose. God has a destiny. God has a future. He is calling you into his family, to sell into his horizons, to follow his roadmap. And whatever there is in life, God's got more. Do you want more this morning, church?